In this video, I'll show you how you can set up the Figaf tool to be able to manage your SAP PI PO integration, creating test cases, being able to transport your SAP integration. So we start out from scratch. I have a laptop or a desktop here without any prior installation of the tool. I have access to my PI systems using my normal user. I'm administrator of those systems. The first thing you want to do is you want to go to the Figaf site, say, hey, you want to download it, enter your name and email address, and you will need to add a number and agree to the privacy policy, otherwise you will not get a license key. And then you will be redirected to the site here, and you will then hopefully get an email with a license key within a short period of time. In the meantime, you will go to the page you are redirected to. You can go select download. Here you can download the jar file. And then we will be using Java 8. There's also a Java 11 script that you can be using. So once you have downloaded the file, what you want to do is you want to move it into a separate folder. Let me just do that on the different screen. Keep, obviously, and we have now so now I have my folder with this specific filing. I will then create a new file. I cannot really do that with this, so the easiest approach is to just create a new notepad, or notepad++ preferably. Create a new file in that, and in here you will then add this value here, and you obviously need to make sure that this corresponds to the jar file that you have. So every time you download a new jar, this needs to be changed, and we want to save it in the same folder as we have here, and run.bat. And then, yeah, this is for Windows. For Linux, you need to change some of these new line parameters, but that should be pretty simple. So what you can do now is you just click on Run, and this will then bring up this command. Select the right place to move. This will bring up this command line. Do not select anything in here. If you do, it will stop processing as long as you have selected. But then you can also see here you have the line break. You can open this in Node++ and see what the system is doing. And depending on your system, it may take 20 seconds to 2 minutes to get started. And once you are started, you can go to this URL you have here. So localhost, the port you have decided, and then port 8080. It will automatically log you in with a super user, and then it recommends you to change the password. This is also something you can deselect. Skip it for now. So each time now it will start up with the specific password. I got an email with a license key in, and I can put it in here. I can load license, and then this will create a license with all the data that we have for the specific case. So the first thing is we need to add our SAP systems to here. We will then go here to the agent. So each system is an agent, and we have D75. It's a PO system. My username is Daniel. Password. It's HTTP. So you'll take this one, the URL here. You can select it as virtual if you do not. So if we, for instance, want to connect to your productive system but not really do anything with that for the specific time, then we can define here the P4 port. Normally this is just +4. Otherwise, I think you can see it inside of the configuration what this is. You have here which way to retrieve modules, and the best way is use the ERT agent module. This is a module you add to the system that makes it easier for you to manage the integration. But obviously it's a little more complicated in a POC, so in most cases I do recommend using the SAP log module, and there it will just use the log module at the processing, making it a little easier to set it up. You set that. If you have an older system, we do have an option to use web scraping. I think this is if it is more than the PI has not been patched the last 2 years, something like that, maybe 3. But it will come with a check saying whether or not this is available. We can enable all of these, but I think this is not really necessary for these other things. So let's try to save it. And then we can run a test over here, test configuration. We see it is working. If you have selected the other option with ERT log module, it will also test that it has access to it. Good. So now we've created the first system. Let's create the second one. This is the T775. Same host name. And same P4 port. So the P4 port I think is used mostly if you use the GMS, but there may also be some dependency if you are using it for transports. So now we'll have that defined. We can test the configuration. So this seems that there is a password that does not have the required role in the system, so it will complain that you do not have it. I do have another one. Let's try that one. Otherwise I could always have assigned these. Let me just fix this. So now I found the right password. So now we have defined our systems, and the next thing we want to do is define our landscape. How does that look? So to create our landscape, we define this as PI. It's a process orchestration. We will use transport management functionality. We have two options to do transport. One is to use the Figaf tool as the main transport engine. It's the best way, I think, to do transport. You can also use this other option. This is if you have CTS Plus and you do not want to make changes to that process at the moment, then the tool will act on top of the CTS transport. We can specify if we want to have separate approval tracks on it and who is supposed to be approving this. Now we can then define the landscapes in it here, and we will have dev QA. We can obviously will define production and everything like that also in this flow. Once you have created this, you cannot really make a change to it, so you need to delete the landscape and create it again. So what we have done now is we have created the system, we have connected to it, and the next thing is we need to get all the data that exists in the system. So what we'll do there is we will press synchronize, and this will then go and download all the objects on the system. And this could obviously take a little bit of time, depending on your computer, the size of it, what it's able to do, and the number of objects that you have. And we're trying to minimize it as much as possible, but there may be quite a number of requests that it needs to be performing. Okay, so mine is not that big of a system, so there's only 11 seconds. If you take the other one here, the QA production probably doesn't take that long. So if we go over here, one of the things we do have is operation monitor, and with this we can get an insight about how many messages that has been processed for this duration of time. So I think it's the last month. It will process and then will give you an idea about which message mappings has been processed. So we have the report over here. So it contains which modules you have on the system, which scenarios do you have, and out here how many times they have been executed. And then you have the operations perspective that says we have this message mapping that has most likely been executed 500 times. But obviously that can depend a little on how your configuration has been set up and stuff like that. But at least it will give you some idea about what's active on the system. Good. So now the first thing we want to do is we want to create some test cases. And to do that, we will go to integration objects. Here we will find something. We can do it on our development system, or we can do it on our test system. But for the development, it's a lot easier. So we will select a number of icons, and obviously the best is if you can create something that is possible to trigger once you have done it. Otherwise it becomes a little difficult creating these test cases. You can then say record messages. We need to add this into a test suite. So test suite is a way to group test cases for these things. Which messages do we want to fetch? How many messages from each process? Do we want to have specific partner operations? Do we want to extract partner information so we can have so I think here we have seller. So that means we can actually understand and look into the payload and see what these values are. And these can also be defined on an item level. We can set up specific ordering and all these kind of things. It will ask us to request the licenses. We will also request DevOps. So testing is being able to test these. DevOps is the option to be able to transport and manage the processes. We'll get through that later. So now we have created this. We will then start the processing. And when you do this, it will log onto the system. It will apply configuration, which means it will add this SAP standard logging modules for these commands or these channels. And then you will trigger some messages on it, and then you can start pulling these messages. Let's see if the process of us adding these modules meant that it created some messages on this. I think it did. So we got some on some of these, which is good. So what we'll do is for these 4 messages, we have 3 inbound and 3 outbound messages. And we can go in here, we can see more details on these things. We can see all the payloads that exist in this case for this specific message. So we will create a new test cases. We cannot do it for the first one because it does not have adequate data. We can specify how to map these between the different systems where they can be run on. So now we have so it's processed it in 2 times because we got this message in 2 partners. So we got both 123 and 124 and it's the same method that it's processing for all of these, but just for me to create test cases a little easier. So we can see it actually extracted the message information and are able to process this. So what we can actually do is now we can select to run on a specific system. If you do not select, or if you just select run, it will run on all the different systems where this has been mapped. And then we can go here, we can pull the result, and this will then start downloading all the test messages that we have as a part of this. And as you can see, it says pretty quick. And then you can go in here, you can view the results. Oh, we're getting some errors. Let's see what these errors are. And this is that we have a date that is different. So we can just double click that, and then this will be ignored for the specific test case. And then we'll need to go through all of these different interfaces, view the results, view the diffs. And I can tell you, these are all the same thing. So what we can do now is we have an option here to rerun them, or we can just do a recompare. Which one do we want to recompare? And it will compare all of these again, with the exception that we just added that it needs to ignore certain elements, or ignore the date element, and then at some point in time it will figure out that there's a fewer bugs. One thing that is interesting also is when you're creating this, if you have systems that are different, so you have D75, T75, you can add system mappings between these. So you can have ERP-D, and in this one you will put ERP-T, and that means that if it finds you have ERP-T in this one, it will then be translated to ERP-D as a business system. You can also translate partners and stuff like that, and interfaces if you want to go into that kind of details. So now let's just check the test suite here if it has been updated. What are the results of this? So now we can see we're getting 2 successful and 2 of the messages is in error. We can export all of these test run results to a CSV file if you want to do that. That way we can see a little about what is being processed for these things. So we got a good overview of who is making these commands. So that was how you set up the test suites, and obviously there's a lot of more details about what you can do if you want to run test, specific configuration for specific partners, messages combination, comparing EDI, X12 and stuff like that. And there's a pretty good help up here you can find that will give you insight about all the different tabs or pages you are, how you can extract these data. So that was testing. The next part we want to do is we want to be able to transport these things. And to do that, one of the things we will go into our development system here. We can obviously make a change to an object, and let's just try to do that. I will just pause while I'm doing that. So now I've just made a few changes to the system, and let's see if we can find it. So we'll do a synchronization of and see what all has been changed, and you can see it is really fast. And if we look at what was changed, we can see it was a message mapping, we can see it was an ICO, and we can see it's a communication channel. So let's look at this, and for all objects you have full versioning here, so we can see which object was actually changed. And if we look at it, we can see that the description up here was changed between these 2 versions. So it is really simple to see whenever something has changed. It will only save versions whenever you do synchronization, but you can schedule that in the agent settings, so you will get synchronized and changes whenever they happen. So that is, now we have created some changes, and what we can do is we can then say, okay, now we want to transport these changes, and this is something we have done. It's either a new development or change configuration, but my first ticket, we will specify which landscape we need to use. We will specify the Jira or Solman or incident number that we're using, and here we can put in the Jira URL for it. We can put in the description of this here, and then the idea with this ticket, it's not going to replace Jira, but just be as a way to represent all the data that is needed to make this Jira incidents. So we can look at here, we can see all the data that's involved here. We can see the changes between this, and what we can then do is we can go to the test cases tab. Here we can look up what are the test cases that we have created for this. We can add these, so it is really simple to just continue adding these things, and we can specify where we want to run it. For this process, now we just want to run on the development system, being able to run all of these tests, and that means that we are actually able to ensuring all tests are run and all interfaces is working as we build along creating these things. And then we can need to pull the results, get the downloader. Then it's the same kind of view as we had in the test suite. We can also see here if there was any of these mappings conversions that were needed between the systems. We can export it, we can do comparison on all these kind of things as we had in the test. So obviously a lot of errors. We'll need to go through them again and to see what is actually the reason for this. Yeah, and that was obviously because we did make some changes to the values. So let's just check out this one. So here we can see that there was a change in the price, and that was because we made a change in the price of the config. And obviously that's a little bad if developers would just do that without a business reason, and that's why we built this process around it. You can go in and on these testing results here, and you can select and say, okay, now I've gone through this, and next time I run it, these are the values that I expect for this. So it becomes really a living test cases that you can run, update as you move along and figure out what is going on in this case. And then obviously we want to run it again, make sure that all are successful. That's good. Cool. Now let's start the transport, and this is where the fun thing starts, and where you can start seeing a lot of value. And now it complains here, I actually need to add a few files, and now we'll just download these. So we can just click here, keep it, and keep, and it says here that these must be added to a folder called libs inside of the release we have. So we'll go in here, we have here create a new folder that's called, and then we'll take our downloaded files, put them into libs folder, and what we need to do is then we need to go to our console here, press Ctrl C. If you just close it, you may end up with deleting or destroying the database or giving it some incomplete. It comes with a built-in database. It's okay for proof of concept, some okay data, but obviously it's not really scalable, and it can contain some challenges with terms of this. So Control C is the way to kill this, and now it's killed. And we can then start up the boot file again, run.bat. let's just give it a few seconds to start up. But we wanted to just make it sure that you got these jars and you didn't need to look at where you needed to get it, but it just helps you figuring them out from the current environment. Good. So we can start the transport. Hopefully this will work now. So now it's created. And what we can see now is we can see the message mapping. We have an option here to do comparison. We can see on all objects what is different between these at different levels. So we can just say we want to import this. If you set up approval, some guy needs to approve it before it can be imported. And that makes it possible to have admins that can handle and configure the services, approve all your transport, and get really a good view about what is being changed as a part of this change. So now it's imported that one, and we have the directory transport. And what we can see here is if we look at the communication channel, one of the parameters we have here is we have an option here to define what are the values that is different between these two things. So yeah, obviously I've transported this in a number of different ways, but we can go in, specify which parameter needs to be changed between these things. So we can see it's already exists on that target system, so there's really no need to make any changes to it in this perspective. So it knows everything. It's able to handle this. If it's new configuration, it will just show you the same configuration inherited from the development system. So what you need to do is go save, and you can validate the transport. This will just check if you have entered all the required passwords. If there's passwords that you need, you can press import. So now the import is done, and we can go back to our ticket. We can set it to resolved, and that way we know it's done. We don't need to do anything more on it. We can look at the reports, so we can generate a report of all the things that we have done through this this generation. We can look at it. And we can see we get some errors in it because we haven't rerun the tests. And this is give a good idea about what kind of reports we have and what kind of options we have. And here we can actually see all the detail that is happening with this and what are the errors. So we got full documentation about what's going on. We can show which transport we are running when they were imported on different systems. All the information, which objects were part of this. And then we have the Jira documentation, all this that we can then use this, put it into Jira. So now our transport is done. What we can then do is, if we at some point in time go back and we look at a specific object, we can go in, we can check all the versions, and we can see that which version it has been attached to some object. And we can go in and we can see this ticket. And that means we got full visibility. Once something has been imported to production, what were the tests? What were all these relevant resources? We got the Jira number or Solman number, so we can actually go back to that specific system, ask which business user asked for this or what was going on there. There's obviously also a lot of other functionality, more complicated things in setting up this. So one of the cool features we also have is the testing or the support tool. And what you can do here is you can create a consumer, and this is a component-based message alert. Let's see if we have some. And then it needs to schedule this. I don't think there's actually anything on this one, but let's see. The idea is that it will then fetch all of these messages into here. So you need to set it up as a component-based message alert. You can find more details about what you can do here. You can then create rules, and then as you go along, you figure out we're getting this error, what was the reason for it, and being able to set it up. So this is a little highlight about what the Figaf tool is able to do, how it can help you manage your SAP PI PO, and obviously a nice place feature it also has is it has an overview of your systems, of your landscape, so you can easily go to the relevant systems. The idea is also that developers should not really have access to QA productions. All should be handled with the tool, and you have the option to create test cases, being able to run them and demand, making sure they're updated and always correct. So I hope you want to try it out. You have seen how to get started. Go to figaf.com, start the download, getting started, and it's about 30 minutes. So thanks.